NBC News International correspondent Josh Lederman, also with us, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, and MSNBC International Affairs analyst Michael McCall. So, Josh, today Ukraine also carried out the largest drone attack yet on Russian air bases. What do we know about that?
So according to the SBU, which is Ukraine's elite security service, they say that Ukraine overnight attacked 4 different Russian air bases in the largest drone attack of the war so far. And the Ukrainians are saying that the goal here was really to reduce Russia's ability to use air forces and air capabilities against the Ukrainians. Of course, we've heard from the Ukrainians for a couple years now about how they feel like a big weakness for them is the fact that they don't have the same kind of air capabilities as the Russians. That's why they've been asking for those F-16s for so long. Now, the Russians are continuing to maintain that they have this situation in the Kursk region under control, but increasingly there are signs that this is not under control for them, that they are really struggling to respond to this. We've seen satellite imagery showing the Russians who are now trying to build trenches in their own territory to fend off additional advances by the Ukrainians. In addition to those 100 or more Russian prisoners of war that the Ukrainians now claim that they have been able to capture, we're hearing the Ukrainians say that a key goal for them is to create a buffer zone. They essentially want an area on the Russian side of the border from which Russia cannot launch attacks towards Ukraine in the future. The Russians have not discussed really much about how exactly they plan to wrest control back from the Ukrainians, but we're starting to hear from Russian military bloggers who are very influential, publicly criticizing the Russian government for the fact that they seemed so caught off guard by this incursion and the fact that more than a week after Ukraine crossed the border into Russia, they have still been unable to take back their territory.
Josh Lederman, thank you so very much. So, Ambassador, I want to talk a little bit more about this. The Washington Post is reporting that the Ukrainian foreign ministry spokesman took the opportunity to, quote, troll the Kremlin about taking over some of their territory, saying, quote, I can emphasize here that unlike Russia, Ukraine does not need that which belongs to someone else. Now, I know you've negotiated, Ambassador, with Putin before. How much of an impact do you think this is having on Putin, and how significant is this incursion?
Well, because Russia's not a democracy and there's no independent media, we can't see what the public reaction is, and the public reaction wouldn't have an effect on Putin's power, right? Think about if this happened in the United States. This would be an outrageous event, and you'd be covering it every segment, and American people would be demanding what's happening. That's not the case because Russia's a dictatorship. But I think psychologically, this blow is tremendous to Putin, especially among elites, because he's supposed to be the protector. He's supposed to be the strong man, defending Russia against the West, defending Russia against Ukraine. And now for a second time in as many years, he has failed to do so. Remember, this reminds me a lot of what Mr. Prigozhin did, the rogue uprising that happened last year, where he was marching towards Moscow. Putin had to negotiate with him to stop that. Here, the Ukrainians aren't going to negotiate with him to leave. And it's clear to me that so far he does not have a strategy for repelling him. I think psychologically this is very damaging to Vladimir Putin.
Does it, you think, affect his stranglehold on the Russian military? Is this something that could actually erode that stranglehold?
Maybe. Hard to say early on. Most certainly we saw that when Prigozhin was marching towards Moscow last summer. But this is an embarrassment for intelligence. Remember, the intelligence folks didn't get this right either. It's an embarrassment for the military. Josh rightly talked about these very influential bloggers saying, what's going on here? What has happened to our military? And I think it's also striking. We're already a week into it, and there's been no response. And I think part of the reason is usually Russia, to deal with such kinds of situations where they're trying to liberate territory, they usually carpet bomb cities and kill lots of innocent civilians and other non-military targets. That's what they did in Ukraine. They did that in Syria. They did that in Chechnya. They can't do that on their own territory, and therefore I think Putin faces a real dilemma. How is he going to liberate this territory? So far, he has no answer.
Yeah, and, you know, he has no answer to this. His answer to Prigozhin's activities ended up, well, with Prigozhin not having a good flight. Ambassador Michael McFaul, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.